My friends, colleagues, and fellow seekers of economic truth, let me begin by asking a simple but piercing question. How many times must we watch the same play before we realize the script never changes? Once again, we find ourselves witnessing what the media calls a trade dispute, this time between the United States and Ontario. And yet, beneath the headlines, this is not about trade at all. It is about power, profit, and the unrelenting struggle between those who own and those who work. Let us begin with a truth that most people sense, but few articulate. The chaos we witness in the headlines is rarely the real story. When you hear phrases like trade dispute, economic rivalry, or market instability, understand that you are seeing shadows on the wall, not the forces casting them. These headlines are designed to capture attention, to create the illusion that the problem lies in a diplomatic misunderstanding or a policy gone wrong. But in reality, what we are witnessing is the natural expression of an economic system whose very foundations are built on conflict, competition, and inequality. The surface may shift, tariffs today, sanctions tomorrow, but the underlying pattern remains painfully consistent. You see, trade chaos between nations like the United States and Canada does not erupt out of thin air. It emerges from a system structured to pit economies and therefore people against one another. When the media tells you that the U.S. envoy clashed with Ontario, they focus on the personalities, the politics, and the posturing. What they fail to show is that beneath that clash lies a much deeper struggle, the struggle between classes. It's not truly a fight between nations, but between those who profit from the system and those who bear its costs. That is the economic reality hiding in plain sight. Ask yourself this: who benefits when one country imposes tariffs on another? It's not the working class citizens in either place. The workers in Detroit don't gain when Ontario's factories slow down, and the workers in Hamilton don't prosper when American exports drop. Both sides suffer, while the corporations, the ones moving capital freely across borders, quietly adjust, hedge, and profit from the confusion. They are the only constant winners in this endless drama. So the first lesson, my friends, is to stop being distracted by the noise. The true story is not in the diplomat's statements, but in the balance sheets of those who control the economy. The genius and the tragedy of capitalism is its ability to disguise its own contradictions. It convinces people that crises are temporary, that problems are isolated, and that little more regulation or a better trade deal will set things right. But when a system produces instability over and over again, it is not malfunctioning, it is functioning exactly as designed. Competition is its lifeblood, and conflict is its natural offspring. The so-called trade chaos is not a mistake. It is a symptom of a system that thrives on chaos to justify its control. Now, here's the hook. Every time we focus on the spectacle, we surrender the power to question the structure. The headlines keep us looking outward to the next summit, the next agreement, the next political feud, while the real architects of the economy remain comfortably in the shadows. They prefer it that way. The more we argue about which country is to blame, the less we discuss why both sides are trapped in a game they did not design. That's the magician's trick of modern capitalism. Keep your eyes on the hand waving the flag so you don't see the hand counting the profits. To truly understand the world we live in, we must learn to read past the headlines. We must train ourselves to see patterns instead of episodes, systems instead of scandals. When a trade envoy clashes with a foreign leader, when tariffs rise or treaties crumble, ask not what happened, but who benefits. That single question cuts through the noise like a blade. It reveals that the constant tension between nations is less about national pride and more about economic power, who holds it, who uses it, and who is denied it. If you want to reclaim your understanding of the world, if you want to stop being a spectator in the theater of economic chaos, start by rejecting the illusion that these events are random. They are not. They are the predictable outcomes of an economic system that serves a narrow few at the expense of the many. Once you recognize that, You no longer see trade disputes as crises, you see them as symptoms of something far deeper. You stop chasing the headlines and start confronting the system itself. And that, my friends, is where real change begins. We have been told over and over again that competition is the engine of progress, that it drives innovation, rewards hard work, and separates the capable from the complacent. But rarely do we stop to ask the competition for whom and at whose expense. In reality, the competition that defines our modern world is not a noble race toward excellence. It is a carefully orchestrated conflict designed to keep working people divided, anxious, and powerless. And nowhere is this more visible than in the realm of international trade, when political leaders declare that we must protect American jobs or defend Canadian industries. They invoke the language of patriotism. It sounds noble, even inspiring. But beneath those stirring words lies a deeply manipulative strategy. It is not a call for unity. It is a call for division, because every time workers in one country are told their suffering is caused by workers in another, the real culprits, the corporations and elites who design the system, escape scrutiny once again. That, my friends, is not patriotism, that is misdirection. Consider the spectacle unfolding between the United States and Ontario. We're told it's a trade dispute, a clash of national interests. But let's peel back the rhetoric. American workers are told that Canadian competition is taking their jobs, while Canadian workers are told that American policies are undermining theirs. Both sides are angry, fearful, and struggling, but both sides are fighting the wrong enemy. The truth is that neither group controls the factories, the trade agreements, or the flow of capital. They are pawns on a board where the rules were written by others. Here's the hook. The most dangerous myth in modern economics is that workers in different countries are each other's rivals. Nothing could be further from the truth. The worker in Detroit and the worker in Hamilton are not adversaries. They are reflections of one another. Both wake up each morning to sell their labor for a wage that never quite keeps up with the cost of living. Both live under the constant threat of layoffs, automation, and outsourcing, and both are told to blame one another when the system tightens the screws. Divide and conquer. It is one of the oldest strategies of power, and capitalism has perfected it. Now imagine what would happen if that illusion shattered. Imagine if workers in the United States, Canada, Mexico, and beyond recognized that they share the same struggle, that the problem is not the worker across the border, but the system that forces them to compete for survival. That realization would change everything. It would transform trade disputes from international crises into opportunities for international solidarity. It would replace fear with strength, resentment with cooperation, and isolation with unity. But let's be clear, such unity will never be handed to us. The system depends on our separation. It thrives when we see one another as competitors instead of comrades. The media reinforces it daily, pitting worker against worker, sector against sector, nation against nation, as though the suffering of one group were the success of another. They sell us the myth that prosperity is a zero-sum game, that one person's gain must be another's loss. Yet the truth, as history shows, is that the working majority has always been strongest when it acts collectively across all boundaries. Ask yourself who benefits when workers compete. When one factory is closed in the United States and reopened in Mexico, the workers of both nations lose, but the company's shareholders win. When one nation slashes environmental or labor standards to attract investment, workers everywhere suffer, but corporate profits rise. This is not competition, it is exploitation wearing the mask of progress. We must unlearn the logic of division that capitalism has drilled into us. The future will not belong to those who fight each other for scraps. It will belong to those who recognize their shared humanity and act together to claim what they have built. Real power begins when workers stop seeing themselves as isolated individuals and start seeing themselves as a global class with common interests. So the next time you are told that your neighbor across the border is your competitor, remember this: you are being sold a story. And the moral of that story always ends the same way, with you working harder for less while someone else counts the profits. Reject that story. Write a new one. Because the day we refuse to compete and choose instead to unite, the world will begin to change in ways the powerful can no longer control. Anger is a powerful emotion. It can destroy or it can transform. The question that determines the course of history is not whether people are angry, it is what they do with that anger. Today, millions feel that something in the economy is profoundly wrong. They sense the injustice when they work harder than ever and yet fall further behind. They see corporations reporting record profits while ordinary families can barely afford rent, health care, or education, and they feel the rising tension of a system that demands their obedience while rewarding their exploitation. That anger is justified. The tragedy is not that people are angry. The tragedy is that their anger is too often left directionless, manipulated, or diffused before it becomes power. You see, capitalism has developed a sophisticated way of absorbing and neutralizing anger. When the pressure builds, it offers easy targets: immigrants, foreign workers, other nations, even one's neighbors. It turns systemic problems into personal resentments. It teaches us to shout at one another instead of organizing together. This is how a system maintains control, by ensuring that the fire of public frustration burns everywhere except where it matters most. But anger that never organizes is anger that never changes anything. It becomes background noise, loud, emotional, but ultimately harmless to those in power. Here's the hook: every protest, every demand, every transformation that has ever reshaped society began when people decided that their anger would no longer be a private feeling but a collective force. When workers in history decided to form unions, when citizens demanded civil rights, when movements rose up against injustice, it always started the same way, with people realizing that their suffering was not isolated, that what they faced individually was part of a shared condition. That is the moment when anger becomes action, when frustration turns into focus and despair turns into determination. The system thrives on passivity. It counts on you to complain, not to challenge. It expects you to be cynical, to believe that nothing can change, that the game is rigged, that you might as well accept what is. Cynicism is the oxygen of oppression. It keeps injustice alive. But when people stop accepting, when they move from muttering to mobilizing, the system begins to tremble. It's not the anger itself that frightens the powerful, it's the organization that follows it. We live in a time where people's outrage is abundant but fragmented. Social media amplifies discontent but often drains it of substance. The system has learned to commodify anger, to sell it back to us in the form of headlines, hashtags, and political slogans. But real change does not come from outrage alone. It comes from building institutions of resistance, from creating movements that endure beyond a single moment. The challenge then is not simply to feel angry, but to make that anger useful. Turn it into study groups, unions, cooperatives, and communities that challenge the logic of profit and demand the logic of justice. Anger, when properly directed, is not destructive, it is creative. It creates solidarity where isolation once reigned. It builds alternatives where despair once lingered. Think of every major advance humanity has made, from labor protections to universal suffrage, from anti-colonial struggles to social welfare. None of it came from polite requests. It came from the organized determination of people who refused to remain silent. They understood that power concedes nothing willingly. It must be confronted, exposed, and replaced. So, when you feel anger at the system, do not suppress it, refine it, shape it into something constructive. Ask yourself, who benefits from my silence? Who profits from my despair? And what can I build alongside others that challenges the structures that caused this anger in the first place? Because anger without direction is the spark that burns out, but anger with purpose, that is the spark that starts a revolution of consciousness. Every moment of outrage is an invitation to act. Every injustice you witness is a call to build something better. The powerful fear not your frustration, but your organization. They can dismiss your complaints. They cannot ignore your collective strength. The next chapter of economic history will not be written by those who merely shout at the system, but by those who decide to stand together and change it. That is how anger becomes not a symptom of despair, but the heartbeat of transformation. Every generation faces a defining moment, a point where history seems to pause and ask, "What will you do?" Ours is such a moment. We are standing at the edge of an economic transformation, whether we acknowledge it or not. The old story, the one that promised endless growth, prosperity through competition, and fairness through markets, is collapsing under its own contradictions. You can feel it in the uncertainty that hangs over every paycheck, every student loan, every healthcare bill. You can see it in the hollowed out towns, in the gig workers juggling 3 jobs, in the rising despair of people who have done everything society told them to do: study hard, work hard, play by the rules, only to find the rules changing faster than they can keep up. The old story is crumbling, and the question is simple: will we be brave enough to write a new one? For decades, we were told that capitalism was the only way, that its flaws were temporary, its crises were accidental, and its rewards would eventually reach everyone. But history, stubborn as it is, refuses to cooperate with such illusions. What we have instead is an economy that rewards speculation over creation, greed over generosity, and profit over purpose. We live in a time where billionaires accumulate more wealth in a single year than millions of workers will see in a lifetime, while entire generations are priced out of basic dignity, housing, education, and healthcare. That is not progress, that is a moral and economic failure. And like every failure in history, it demands a response. Here's the hook: every generation before us was told that change was impossible until they made it happen. Workers were told they could never unionize, that they would never win an 8-hour day, that slavery, segregation, or child labor were simply the way things are. Yet each time, ordinary people defied those limits and wrote a new chapter. The same opportunity now rests with us. We are not spectators in this story, we are its authors. The pen, my friends, is in our hands, and the ink is our courage. To rewrite the economic story means to challenge the assumption that markets should rule every corner of human life. It means asking a radical but necessary question: what if the economy existed to serve people instead of people serving the economy? What if production and profit were guided not by corporate boards, but by the communities whose labor makes them possible? What if democracy extended beyond the voting booth and into the workplace, where decisions about jobs, wages, and production are made collectively, not imposed from above? That is not utopian fantasy. It is the logical next step in humanity's long journey toward fairness and freedom. We must understand that the story we inherited was never written for us. It was written about us by those who profit from our compliance. It tells us to compete, to consume, to conform. But a new story, one that values cooperation over competition and sustainability over short-term gain, begins when people stop believing they are powerless. Power, after all, does not vanish, it shifts. And right now it is shifting toward those willing to question everything that once seemed unquestionable. This new story will not be written in boardrooms or stock exchanges. It will be written in classrooms, workplaces, and communities, wherever people dare to imagine that the world could be otherwise. It begins with conversations, with courage, with the recognition that history is not a spectator sport. The truth is that the structures we live under are human creations, and what is made by humans can be remade by humans. So when you look at the chaos of trade disputes, inequality, and political paralysis, do not see it as the end of something. See it as the beginning. Every collapse in history has carried within it the seeds of renewal. The question is not whether change will come, but who will shape it. Will it be written by those who cling to the old order, or by those who dare to imagine something better? The choice, as always, belongs to us. So when you hear the words trade chaos, do not be fooled. The chaos is not between nations, it is within the system itself. The U.S. Envoy in Ontario may argue over trade balances and tariffs, But what's really at stake is who controls the wealth we all create. The lesson of history is clear. Until we replace a system driven by private greed with one organized around public need, democratic control of production, cooperation instead of competition, we will relive these crises again and again.